Hey everybody, Bormac here, to continue reading Terry Pratchett's The Color of Magic. We're still in Chapter 1, page 32, about halfway down, second paragraph to be specific, if any of you are familiar with the book. And just to give you a idea, the entire chapter is 63 pages long, so I got about halfway through last time. Let's see how far I can get this time. Hopefully my throat will toughen up as I read these and I'll be able to go longer. Don't take that the wrong way, please. Okay. So 1 minute of nonsense and go. High above the disk, the second albatross soared. So high, in fact, that its tiny, mad orange eyes could see the whole of the world and the great, glittering circle sea. There was a yellow message capsule strapped to one leg. Far below it, unseen in the clouds, the bird that had brought the earlier message to the patrician of Ankh-Morpork flapped gently back to its home. Rincewind looked at the tiny square of glass in astonishment. There he was, all right, a tiny figure in perfect color, standing in front of a group of watchmen whose faces were each frozen in a terrified rictus. A buzz of wordless terror went up from the men around him as they craned over his shoulder to look. Gritting Two-Flower produced a handful of smaller coins Rincewind now recognized as quarter Rinthu. He winked at the wizard. No, of course. I had similar problems when I stopped over in the Brown Islands, he said. They thought the iconograph steals a bit of their souls. Laughable, isn't it? Yarg, said Rincewind. It did, because somehow that was hardly enough to keep up his side of the conversation. Added, I don't think it looks very like me, though. It's easy to operate, said Two-Flower, ignoring him. Look, all you have to do is press the button. The iconograph does the rest. Now I'll just stand over here next to Harun, and you can take the picture. Coins quieted the men's agitation in the way that gold can, and Rincewind was amazed to find half a minute later that he was holding a little glass portrait of Two-Flower wielding a huge notched sword and smiling as though all his dreams had come true. They lunched at a small eating house near the Brass Bridge, with the luggage nestling under the table. Food and wine, both far superior to Rincewind's normal fare, did much to relax him. Things weren't going to be too bad, he decided. A bit of invention and some quick thinking was all that was needed. Two-Flower seemed to be thinking too. Looking reflectively into his wine cup, he said, Tavern fights are pretty common around here, I expect? Oh, fairly. No doubt fixtures and fittings get damaged? Oh, I see. Oh, wait. Oh, I see. You mean like benches and whatnot? Yeah, I suppose so. That must be very upsetting for the innkeepers. I've never really thought about it. I suppose it must be one of the risks of the job. Two-Flower regarded him thoughtfully. I might be able to help there, he said. Risks are my business. I say, this food is a bit greasy, isn't it? You did say you wanted to try some typical Morporkian food, said Rincewind. What was that about risks? Oh, I know all about risks. They're my business. I thought that's what you said. I didn't believe it the first time either. Oh, I don't take risks. About the most exciting thing that happened to me was knocking some ink over. I assess risks, day after day. Do you know what the odds against a house catching fire in the Red Triangle district of Bespalargic? 588 or 38 to 1. I calculated that, he added with a trace of pride. What? Rincewind tried to suppress a burp. What for? Excuse me. He helped himself to some more wine. For Two-Flower paused. I can't say it in Traub, he said. I don't think Betrabi have a word for it. In my language, we call it... He said a collection of outlandish syllables. In sewer ants, said Rincewind. That's a funny word. What's it mean? Insurance. Well, I suppose. Well, suppose you had a ship loaded with, say, gold bars. It might run into storms or be taken by pirates. You don't want that to happen, so you take out an insurance policy. I work out the odds against the cargo being lost based on weather reports and piracy record for the last 20 years. Then I add a bit, and you pay me some money based on those odds. And the bit, Rincewind said, wagging a finger solemnly. And then, if the cargo is lost, I reimburse you. Reimburse? I pay you the value of your cargo, said Two Flower patiently. I get it. It's like a bet, right? A wager? In a way, I suppose. And you make money at this in sewer ants? It offers a return on investment, certainly. Wrapped in the warm yellow glow of the wine, Rincewind tried to think of insurance in the Circle C terms. I don't think I understand this insurance, he said firmly, idly watching the world spin by. Magic now. Magic I understand. Two Flower grinned. Magic is one thing, and reflected sound of underground spirits is another. He said, What? 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 That's a funny word you just used, said Rincewind impatiently. Reflected sound of underground spirits? Never heard of it. Two Flower tried to explain. Rincewind tried to understand. In the long afternoon, they toured the city turnwise of the river. Two Flower led the way with a strange picture box slung on a strap around his neck. Rincewind trailed behind, whimpering at intervals and checking to see that his head was still there. A few others followed too, in a city where public executions, duels, fights, magical feuds, and strange events regularly punctuated the daily round. The inhabitants had brought the profession of interested bystander to a peak of perfection. They were, to a man, highly skilled gawpers. In any case, Two Flower was delightedly taking picture after picture of people engaged in what he described as typical activities. For since a quarter Rinthu would subsequently change hands for their trouble, a tale of bemused and happy no-vox riches was soon following him in case this madman exploded in a shower of gold. At the temple of the seven-handed Sek, a hasty convocation of priests and ritual heart transplant artisans agreed that the 100-span height of the statue of Sek was altogether too holy to be made into a magic picture, but a payment of 2 Rinthu left them astoundingly agreeing that perhaps he wasn't as holy as all that. A prolonged session at the horror pits produced a number of colorful and instructive pictures, of course, a number of which Rincewind concealed about his person for detailed perusal in private, of course. As the fumes cleared from his brain, he began to speculate seriously as to how the iconograph worked. Even a failed wizard knew that some substances were sensitive to light. Perhaps the glass plates were treated by some arcane process that froze light that passed through them. Something like that, anyway. Rincewind often suspected there was something somewhere that was better than magic. He was usually disappointed. However, he soon took every opportunity to operate the box. I gotta stop reading ahead of where I'm actually at. My eyes go faster than my mouth. Two Flower was only too pleased to allow this, since that enabled the little man to appear in his own pictures. It was at this point that Rincewind noticed something strange. Possession of the box conferred a kind of power on the wielder, which was that anyone confronted with the hypnotic glass eye would submissively obey the most peremptory orders about stance and expression. It was while he was engaged in the Plaza of Broken Moons that disaster struck. Two Flower had posed alongside a bewildered charm seller, his crowd of newfound admirers watching him with interest in case he did something humorously lunatic. Rincewind got down on one knee the better to arrange the picture and pressed the enchanted lever. The box said, "It's no good. I've run out of pink." Hitherto unnoticed door opened in front of his eyes. A small, green, and hideously warty humanoid figure leaned out and pointed at a color-encrusted palette in one clawed hand and screamed at him. "No pink, see?" screeched the homunculus. "No good. You going and pressing the lever when there's no pink. Is there? If you wanted pink, you shouldn't have taken all those pictures of the young ladies. Should you? It's monochrome from now on, friend. All right, yeah, sure," said Rincewind. In one dim corner of the little box, he thought he could see an easel and a tiny unmade bed. He hoped he couldn't. "So long as that's understood," said the imp. He shut the door. Rincewind thought he could hear the muffled sound of grumbling and the scrape of a stool being dragged across the floor. "Two Flower?" he began, and looked up. Two Flower had vanished. Rincewind stared at the crowd with a sensation of prickly horror traveling up his spine. Then, with a gentle prod on the small of his back, "Turn without haste," said a voice like black silk, "or kiss your kidneys goodbye." The crowd watched with interest. It was turning out to be quite a good day. Rincewind turned around slowly, feeling the point of the sword scrape along his ribs. At the other end of the blade, recognized Strinwithel, thief, cruel swordsman, disgruntled contender for the title of worst man in the world. "Hi," he said weakly. A few yards away he noticed a couple of unsympathetic men raising the lid of the luggage and pointing excitedly at the bags of gold. "Ooh." Withel smiled and made an unnerving effect on his scar-crossed face. "I know you," he said. "A gutter wizard. What is that thing?" Rincewind became aware that the lid of the luggage was trembling slightly, although there was no wind, and he was still holding the picture box. "This? It makes pictures," he said brightly. "Hey, just hold that smile, will you?" He backed away quickly and pointed the box. For the moment Withel hesitated. "What?" he said. "That's fine. Hold it just like that," said Rincewind. The thief paused and growled and swung his sword back. There was a snap, a duet of horrible screams. Rincewind did not glance around for fear of the terrible things he might see. By the time Withel looked for him, he was on the other side of the plaza, and still accelerating. The albatross descended in wide, slow sweeps that ended in an undignified flurry of feathers and a thump as it landed heavily on its platform in the patrician's bird garden. The custodian of the birds, still dozing in the sun and hardly expecting a long-distance message so soon after this morning's arrival, jerked to his feet and looked up. A few moments later he was scuttling through the palace's corridors holding the message capsule and, owing to carelessness brought on by surprise, sucking at the nasty beak wound on the back of his hand. Ow. Rincewind pounded down an alley, paying no heed to the screams of rage coming from the picture box, and cleared a high wall with his frayed robe flapping around him like the feathers of a disheveled jackdaw. He landed in the forecourt of a carpet shop, scattering the merchandise and customers, dived through its rear exit, trailing apologies, skidded down another alley, and stopped, teetering dangerously, just as he was about to plunge unthinkingly into the Ankh. There are said to be some mystic rivers, one drop of which can steal a man's life away. After its turbid passage through the Twin Cities, the Ankh could have been one of them. In the distance, the cries of rage took on a shrill note of terror. Rincewind looked around desperately for a boat or a handhold up on the sheer walls on either side of him. He was trapped. Unbidden, the spell welled up in his mind. It was perhaps untrue to say that he had learned it. It had learned him. The episode had led to his expulsion from the unseen university, because For a bet, he had dared to open the pages of the last remaining copy of the creator's own grimoire, the Octavo, while the university librarian was otherwise engaged. The spell had leapt out of the page and instantly burrowed deeply into his mind, whence even the combined talents of the faculty of medicine had been able to coax it. Precisely which one it was they were also unable to ascertain, except that it was one of the 8 basic spells that were intricately interwoven into the fabric of time and space itself. Since then, it had been showing a worrying tendency when Rincewind was feeling run down or especially threatened to try and get itself said. He clenched his teeth together, the first syllable forced itself around the corner of his mouth. He felt his hand raise involuntarily as the magical force whirred around him, began to give off octarine sparks. The luggage hurtled around the corner, its several hundred knees moving like pistons. Rincewind gaped. The spell died unsaid. The box didn't appear to be hampered in any way by the ornamental rug draped roguishly over it, nor the thief hanging by one arm from the lid. It was, in a very real sense, a dead weight. Further along the lid were the remains of 2 fingers, owner unknown. The luggage halted a few feet from the wizard and, after a moment, retracted its legs. It had no eyes that Rincewind could see, but he nevertheless was sure that it was staring at him expectantly. "Shoo!" he said weakly. It didn't budge, but the lid creaked open, releasing the dead thief. Rincewind remembered about the gold. Presumably the box had to have a master. In the absence of Two-Flower, had it adopted him? The tide was turning, and he could see debris drifting downstream in the yellow afternoon light toward the river gate, a mere 100 yards downstream. It was the work of a moment to let the dead thief join them. Even if it was found later, it would hardly cause comment, and the sharks in the estuary were used to solid, regular meals. My goodness. Rincewind watched the body drift away and considered his next move. The luggage would probably float. All he had to do was wait until dusk and then go out with the tide. There were plenty of wild places downstream where he could wade ashore, and then, well, if the patrician really had sent word out about him, then a change of clothing and a shave would take care of that. In any case, there were other lands. He had a facility for languages. Let him but get to Chimera or Gunham or Echalpon, and half a dozen armies couldn't bring him back. And then wealth, comfort, security. There was, of course, the problem of Two-Flower. Rincewind allowed himself a moment's sadness. It could be worse, he said by way of farewell. It could be me. It was when he tried to move that he found his robe was caught on some obstruction. By craning his neck, he found that the edge of it was being gripped firmly by the luggage's lid. Uh-oh. "Ah, Gorfall," said the patrician pleasantly. "Come in, sit down. Can I press you to a candied starfish?" "I am yours to command, master," said the old man calmly. "Say, perhaps, in the matter of preserved echinoderms?" The patrician shrugged and indicated the scroll on the table. "Read that." Gorfall picked up the parchment and raised one eyebrow when he saw the familiar ideograms of the Golden Empire. He read it in silence for perhaps a minute, and then turned the scroll over to examine minutely the seal on the obverse. "You are a famed student of Empire affairs," said the patrician. "Can you explain this?" "Knowledge in the matter of the Empire lies less in noting particular events than in studying a certain cast of mind," said the old diplomat. "The message is curious, but not surprising. This morning the Emperor instructed—" The patrician allowed himself the luxury of a scowl. "Instructed me, Gorfall, to protect this Two-Flower person. Now it seems I must have him killed. You don't find that surprising?" "No. The Emperor is no more than a boy. He is idealistic, keen, a god to his people, whereas this afternoon's letter is, unless I am much mistaken, from 9 Turning Mirrors, the Grand Vizier. He has grown old in the service of several emperors. He regards them as necessary but tiresome ingredients in the successful running of the Empire. He does not like things out of place. The Empire was not built by allowing things to get out of place. That is his view. I begin to see, said the patrician. Quite so. Gorfall smiled into his beard. This tourist is a thing that is out of place. After acceding to his master's wishes, Nine Turning Mirrors would, I am quite sure, make his own arrangements, with a view to ensuring that one wanderer would not be allowed to return home bringing perhaps the disease of dissatisfaction. The Empire likes people to stay where it puts them. So much more convenient if this two-flower disappears for good in the barbarian lands. Meaning here, master. Your advice? Said the patrician. Gorfall shrugged. Merely that you should do nothing. Matters will undoubtedly resolve themselves. However, he scratched his ear thoughtfully. Perhaps the Assassin's Guild? Ah, yes, said the patrician. The Assassin's Guild. Who is their president at the moment? Zorf Flannelfoot, master. Have a word with him, will you? Quite so, master. The patrician nodded. It was all rather a relief. He agreed with Nine Turning Mirrors. Life was difficult enough. People ought to stay where they were put. Brilliant constellations shone down on the Discworld. One by one the traders shuttered their shops. One by one the Ganefs, thieves, fine wirers, horrors, illusionists, backsliders, and second-story men awoke and breakfasted. Wizards went about their polydimensional affairs. Tonight saw the conjunction of two powerful planets, and already the air over the magical quarter was hazy with early spells. Look, said Rincewind, this isn't getting us anywhere. He inched sideways, and the luggage followed faithfully, lid half open and menacing. Rincewind briefly considered making a desperate leap to safety. The lid smacked in anticipation. In any case, he told himself with a sinking heart, the dang thing would only follow him again. It had that dogged look about it. Even if he managed to get a horse, he had a nasty suspicion that it would follow him at its own pace, endlessly, swimming rivers and oceans, gaining slowly every night while he had to stop to sleep. And then one day, in some exotic city years hence, he'd hear the sound of hundreds of tiny feet accelerating down the road behind him. "You've got the wrong man," he moaned. "It's not my fault. I didn't kidnap him." The box moved forward slightly. Now there was just a narrow strip of greasy jetty between Ritzwin's heels and the river. A flash of precognition told him that the box would be able to swim faster than he could. He tried not to imagine what it would be like to drown in the Yonk. "It won't stop until you give in, you know," said a small voice conversationally. Rincewind looked down at the iconograph still hanging around his neck. His trap door was open, and the homunculus was leaning against a frame, smoking a pipe and watching the proceedings with amusement. "I'll take you in with me, at least," said Rincewind through gritted teeth. The imp took the pipe out of his mouth. "What did you say?" he said. "I said I'll take you with me, dang it!" "Suit yourself." The imp tapped the side of the box meaningfully. "We'll see who sinks first." The luggage yawned and moved forward a fraction of an inch. "Oh, all right," said Rincewind irritably. "But you'll have to give me time to think." The luggage backed off slowly. Rincewind edged his way back onto reasonably safe land and sat down with his back against a wall. Across the river, the lights of the Ankh City glowed. "You're a wizard," said the picture imp. "You'll think of some way to find him." "Not much of a wizard, I'm afraid." "You can just jump down on everyone and turn them into worms," the imp added encouragingly, ignoring his last remark. "No, turning to animals is an 8th level spell. I never even completed my training. I only know one spell." "Oh, that'll do." "I doubt it," said Rincewind hopelessly. "What does it do, then?" "Can't tell you. I don't really want to talk about it, but frankly," he sighed, "no spells are much good. It takes 3 months to commit even a simple one of memory, and once you've used it, poof, it's gone. That's what's so stupid about the whole magic thing. You know, you spend 20 years learning the spell that makes nude virgins appear in your bedroom, and then you're poisoned by quicksilver fumes and half blind from reading old grimoires, but you can't remember what happens next. I've never thought of it like that, said the imp. Hey, look, this is all wrong. When Two Flowers said they got better kind of magic in the Empire, I thought, I thought, the imp looked at him expectantly. Rincewind cursed to himself. Well, if you must know, I thought he didn't mean magic, not as such. What else is there then? He began to feel really wretched. I don't know. He said a better way of doing things, I suppose. Something with a bit of sense in it. Tarnishing the lightning or something. The imp gave him a kind but pitying look. Lightning is the spears hurled by the thunder giants when they fight, it said gently. Established meteorological fact. You can't harness it. I know, said Rincewind miserably. That's the flaw in the argument, of course. The imp nodded, disappeared in the depths of the iconograph. A few moments later, Rincewind smelled bacon frying. He waited until his stomach couldn't stand the strain any more, rapped on the box. The imp reappeared. I've been thinking about what you said before, and... but what you said. Let me see. I've been thinking about what you said. It said before Rincewind could open his mouth. And even if you could get a harness on it, how would you get it to pull a cart? What the heck are you talking about? Lightning! It just goes up and down. You'd want it to go along, not up and down. Anyway, it'd probably burn through the harness. I don't care about the lightning. How can I think on an empty stomach? Eat something, then. That's logic. How? Every time I move, the dang box flexes its hinges at me. The luggage on cue gaped widely. See? It's not trying to bite you, said the imp. There's food in there. You're no use to it starved. Soon peered into the dark recesses of the luggage. There were indeed, among the chaos of boxes, bags, and gold, several bottles and packages of oiled paper. He gave a cynical laugh and mooched around the abandoned jetty until he found a piece of wood about the right length, wedged as politely as possible between the gap and the gap between the lid and the box, and pulled out one of the flat packages. It held biscuits that had turned out to be hard as diamond wood. Bloody hell! He muttered, nursing his teeth. Captain Eight Panther's Traveler's Digestives, them, said the imp from the doorway of his box. Saved many a life at sea, they have. Oh, sure. Do you use them as a raft, or throw them out to the sharks instead of watch them sink? What's in the bottles? Poison? Water? There's water everywhere. Why do you want to bring water? Trust. Trust? Yes, that's what he didn't, the water here. See? Rincewind opened the bottle. The liquid inside might have been water. It had a flat, empty flavor with no trace of life. Neither taste nor smell, he grumbled. The luggage gave a little creak, attracting his attention. With a lazy air of calculated menace, it shut its lids slowly, grinding Rincewind's impromptu wedge like a dry loaf. All right, I'm thinking. Moore's headquarters were the leaning tower at the junction of... New paragraph here. Ymore's headquarters were in the leaning tower at the junction of Rhyme Street and Frost Alley. At midnight, the solitary guard, leaning in the shadows, looked up at the conjoining planets and wondered idly what change in his fortunes they might herald. It was the faintest of sounds, as of a gnat yawning. The guard glanced down the deserted street, and now caught the glimmer of moonlight and something lying on the mud a few yards away. He picked it up. The lunar light gleamed on gold, and his intake of breath was almost as loud enough to echo down the alleyway. It was a slight sound again. Another coin rolled into the gutter on the other side of the street. By the time he had picked it up, there was another one a little way off, still spinning. Gold was, he remembered, said to be formed from the crystallized light of stars. Until now he had never believed it to be true, that something as heavy as gold could fall naturally from the sky. As he drew level with the opposite alley mouth, some more fell. It was still in his bag. There was an awful lot of it, and Rincewind... As he drew level with the opposite alley mouth, some more fell. It was still in its bag. There was an awful lot of it, and Rincewind brought it down heavily onto his head. When the guard came to, he found himself looking up into the wild-eyed face of a wizard who was menacing his throat. with a sword. In the darkness, too, something was gripping his leg. It was the disconcerting sort of grip that suggested that the gripper could grip a whole lot harder if he wanted to. "Where is the rich foreigner?" hissed the wizard. "Quickly!" "What's holding my leg?" said the man with a note of terror in his voice. He tried to wiggle free. The pressure increased. "You wouldn't want to know," said the rincewind. "Pay attention, please. Where's the foreigner?" "Not here. They've got him at Broadman's place. Everyone's looking for him. You're a rincewind, aren't you?" The box that bites people." "Oh, no, 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 please." Rincewind had gone. The guard felt the unseen leg gripper release his, or, as he was beginning to fear, its hold. Then he tried to pull himself to his feet. Something big, heavy, and square cannoned into him in the dark and plunged off after the wizard. Something with hundreds of tiny feet. With only his homemade phrase book to help him, Two-Flower was trying to explain the mysteries of insurance to Broadman. The fat innkeeper was listening intently, with his black eyes glittering. From the other end of the table, Ymor watched with mild amusement, occasionally feeding one of his ravens with scraps from his plate. Behind him, Withel paced up and down. "You fret too much," said Ymor, without taking his eyes from the two men opposite him. "I can feel it, Strin. Who would dare attack us here?" "And the gutter wizard will come. He's too much of a coward not to. And he'll try to bargain. And we shall have him. And the gold. And the chest." Withel's one eye glared at him and smacked a fist into the palm of a black-gloved hand. "Who would have thought that there was so much sapient pearwood in the whole of the disk?" he said. "How could we have known?" "You fret too much, Saren." Stren. Saren. "I'm sure you can do better this time," said Ymor pleasantly. The lieutenant snorted in disgust and strode off around the room to bully his men. Ymor carried on watching the tourist. It was strange, but the little man didn't seem to realize the seriousness of his position. Ymor had on several occasions seen him look around the room with an expression of deep satisfaction. He had also been talking for ages to Broadman, and Ymor had seen a piece of paper change hands, and Broadman had given the foreigner some coins. It was strange. When Broadman got up and waddled past Ymor's chair, the thief-master's arm shot out like a steel spring and grabbed the fat man by his apron. "What was that all about, friend?" asked Ymor quietly. "Nothing, Ymor. Just private business, like." "There are no secrets between friends, Broadman." Well, I'm not sure about it myself, really. It's sort of a bet, see?" said the innkeeper nervously. "Insurance, it's called. It's like a bet that the broken drum won't get burned down." Ymor held the man's gaze until Broadman twitched in fear and embarrassment. Then the thief-master laughed. "This worm-eating old tinder pile? The man must be mad." "Yes, but mad with money. He says now he can't remember the word. It begins with a P. He says he can't remember the word. Begins with a P. It's what you might call the stake money. The people he works for in the Adjutant Empire will pay up if the broken drum burns down. Not that I hope it does burn down. The broken drum, I mean. It's like my home. It's like a home to me, the drum." "Not entirely stupid, are you?" said Ymor, and pushed the innkeeper away. The door slammed back on its hinges and thudded into the wall. "Hey, that's my door!" screamed Broadman when he realized who was standing at the top of the steps, and ducked behind the table a mere shaving of time before a short black dart sped across the room and thunked into the woodwork. Ymor moved his hand carefully and poured out another flagon of beer. "Won't you join me, Zlorf?" he said levelly, "and put that sword away, Strin. Zlorf Flannelfoot is our friend." The president of the Assassin's Guild spun his short blowgun dexterously and slotted into its holster in one smooth movement. "Strin!" said Ymor. The black-clad thief hissed and sheathed his sword, but he kept his hand on the hilt and his eyes on the assassin. That wasn't easy. Promotion in the Assassin's Guild was, by competitive examination, the practical being the most important. Indeed, the only part. Thus, Zlorf's broad, honest face was a wealth of scar tissue, the result of many a close encounter. It probably hadn't been all that good-looking in any case. It was said that Zlorf had chosen the profession in which dark hoods, cloaks, and nocturnal prowling figured largely because there was a day-fearing trollish streak in his parentage. People who said this in earshot of Zlorf tended to carry their ears home in their hats. He strolled down the stairs followed by a number of assassins. When he was directly in front of Ymor, he said, "I've come for the tourist." "Is it any of your business, Zlorf?" "Yes," grinned Ormond. "Take him." Two of the assassins stepped forward, and then Strin was in front of them, his sword appearing to materialize an inch from their throats without having to pass through the intervening air. "Possibly I could only kill one of you," he murmured, "but I suggest you ask yourselves which one." "Look up, Zlorf," said Ymor. Row of yellow, baleful eyes looked down from the darkness among the rafters. "One more step and you'll leave here with fewer eyeballs than you came in with," said the thief master. "So sit down and have a drink, Zlorf. Let's talk about this sensibly. I thought we had an agreement. You don't rob, I don't kill. Not for payment, that is," he added after a pause. Zlorf took the proffered beer. "So," he said, "I'll kill him, then you rob him. Is he that funny-looking one over there?" "Yes." Zlorf stared at Two-Flower, who grinned at him. He shrugged. He seldom wasted time wondering why people wanted other people dead. It was just a living. "Who's your client, may I ask?" said Ymor. Zlorf held up a hand. "Please," he protested. "Professional etiquette." "Of course. By the way." "Yes?" "I believe I have a couple of guards outside." "Had." "Some others in the doorway across the street?" "Formerly." "And two bowmen on the roof?" A flicker of doubt passes Zlorf's face, like the last shaft of sunlight over a badly plowed field. The door blew open, badly damaging the assassin who was standing beside it. "Stop doing that!" shrieked Broadman from under his table. Zlorf and Ymor stared up at the figure at the threshold. It was short, fat, richly dressed, very richly dressed. There were a number of tall, big shapes looming behind it. Big, very big, threatening shapes. "Who's that?" said Zlorf. "I know him," said Ymor. "His name's Rerpf. He runs the Groaning Tavern down by Brass Bridge. Strin, remove him." Ripf held up a beringed hand. Strinwitzel hesitated halfway to the door as several very large trolls ducked under the doorway and stood on either side of the fat man, blinking in the light. Muscles the size of melons bulged in their forearms like flour sacks. Each troll held a double-headed axe between thumb and forefinger. Broadman erupted from under the cover, his face suffused with rage. "Out!" he screamed. "Get those trolls out of here!" No one moved. The room was suddenly quiet. Broadman looked around quickly, began to dawn on him what he had said, and to whom. A whimper escaped from his lips, glad to be free. He reached the doorway to his cellars just in time as one of the trolls, with a lazy flick of one ham-sized hand, set the axe whirring across the room. The slam of the door and the subsequent splitting as the axe hit it merged into one sound. "Bloody heck!" exclaimed Zlorf Flannelfoot. "What do you want?" said Ymor. "I am in here on behalf of the Guild of Merchants and Traders," said Rerpf evenly. "To protect our interests, you might say, meaning the little man." Ymor wrinkled his brows. "I'm sorry," he said. "I thought I heard you say the Guild of Merchants and Traders," agreed Rerpf. Behind him now, in addition to more trolls, were several humans that Ymor vaguely recognized. He had seen them baby behind counters and bars, shadowy figures usually, easily ignored, easily forgotten. At the back of his mind he had a bad feeling. And a bad feeling began to grow. He thought about how it might be Say, a fox confronted with an angry sheep. A sheep, moreover, that could afford to employ wolves. Well, how long has this guild been in existence, may I ask? Since this afternoon. I'm vice guildmaster in charge of tourism, you know. What is this tourist of which you speak? We're not quite sure, said Rurf. An old bearded man poked his head over the guildmaster's shoulders and cackled. Speaking on behalf of the wine cellars of Morpork, tourism means business, see? Well, said Ymir coldly. Well, said Rurf, we are protecting our interests, like I said. Thieves out! Thieves out! Cackled the elderly companion. Several others took up the chant, and Zlorf grinned. And assassins! Chanted the old man. Zlorf growled. Stands to reason, said Rurf. I can't pronounce that name. RERPF. People robbing and murdering all over the place. What sort of impression are visitors going to take away? You come all this way to see our fine city with its many points of historical and civic interest, also many quaint customs, and you wake up dead in some back alley, or it might be floating down the Ankh. How are you going to tell your friends what a great time you're having? Let's face it, you've got to move with the times. Zlorf and Ymor met each other's gazes. We have we? Said Ymor. Then let us move, brother, said Zlorf. In one movement he brought his blowgun to his mouth and set a dart hissing towards the nearest troll. It spun around, hurling its axe, which whirred over the assassin's head and buried itself into a luckless thief behind him. Rurf ducked, allowing the troll behind him to raise its huge iron crossbow and fire a spear-length quarrel into the nearest assassin. That was the start. Spear-length quarrel. Ooh. Oh man, that's just... oh man. Ouch. It has been remarked before that those who are sensitive to radiations in the far octary, the eighth color, the pigment of imagination, can see things that others cannot. Thus it was that Rincewind, hurrying through the crowded, flare-lit bazaars of Morpork, with the luggage trundling behind him, jostled a tall figure, turning to deliver a few suitable curses, and beheld death. It had to be death. No one else went around with empty eye sockets, and of course a scythe over one shoulder, and was another clue. As Rincewind stared in horror, a courting couple, laughing at some private joke, walked straight through the apparition without appearing to notice. Death, insofar as was possible, in a face with no movable features, looked surprised. Rincewind? How should I do Death's voice? It's like caps lock. Rincewind? No. He says, Rincewind. There we go, that's good. Death said in tones and deep and heavy as the slamming of leaden doors far underground. Rincewind. Said Rincewind, trying to back away from that eyeless stare. But why are you here? Boom, boom, went cryptlids and worm-haunted fastness under old mountains. Why not? Said Rincewind. Anyway, I'm sure you've got lots to do, so I'll just be... I was surprised that you jostled me, Rincewind, for I have an appointment with thee this very night. Oh, no, not... Of course, that's what's so bloody vexing about the whole business, is that I was expecting to meet thee in Peshopolis. But that's 500 miles away. You don't have to tell me. This whole system's got screwed up again. I can see that. Look, there's no chance of you... Rincewind backed away, hands spread protectively in front of him. The dried fish salesman of a nearby stall watched this madman with interest. Not a chance! I could lend you a very fast horse. No! It won't hurt a bit! No! Screamed Rincewind, turned around and ran. Death watched him go and shrugged bitterly. Sod you, then! Death said, and he turned and noticed a fish salesman. With a snarl, Death reached out a bony finger and stopped the man's heart. But he didn't take much pride in it. Then Death remembered what was due to happen later that night. It would not be true to say that Death smiled, because in any case his features were perforce frozen in a calcareous grin. but he hummed a little tune, cheery as a plague pit, and only pausing to extract a life from a passing mayfly, and 1/9 of the lives from a cat cowering under the fish stall. All cats can see into the octarine. Death turned on his heels and set off toward the broken drum. Short Street, Moorpark, is in fact one of the longest in the city. Filigree Street crosses it turnwise in the matter of a crosspiece with a T, and the broken drum is so placed that it looks down the full length of the street. At the furthest most end of Short Street is a dark oblong rose on a dark oblong rose. At the furthermost end of Short Street, a dark oblong rose on hundreds of tiny legs and started to run. A dark oblong. Maybe he meant a shadow? At first it moved at no more than a lumbering trot, but by the time it was halfway up the street it was moving arrow-fast. A darker shadow inched its way along one of the walls of the drum, a few yards from the two trolls who were guarding the door. Rincewind was sweating. If they heard the faint clinking of the specially prepared bags at his belt, one of the trolls tapped his colleague on the shoulder, producing a noise like two pebbles being knocked together. He pointed down the starlit street. Rincewind darted from his hiding place and turned and hurled his burden through the drum's nearest window. Withal saw it arrive. The back arced across the room, turning slowly in the air, and burst on the edge of the table. A moment later, gold coins were rolling across the floor, spinning and glittering. The room was suddenly silent, save for the tiny noises of gold and the whimpers of the wounded. It was a curse Withal dispatched and the assassin he had been fighting. "It's a trick!" he screamed. "No one move!" 30 men and a dozen trolls froze in mid-grope. Then, for the third time, the door burst open. Two trolls hurried through it and slammed it behind them, then dropped a heavy bar across it and fled down the stairs. Outside there was a sudden crescendo of running feet, and for the last time the door opened. In fact, it exploded, the great wooden bar being hurled far across the room, and the frame itself giving way. The door frame landed on a table, which flew into splinters. It was then that the frozen fighters noticed that there was something else in the pile of wood. It was a box shaking itself madly to free itself of the smashed timber around it. Rincewind appeared in the ruined doorway, hurling another of his gold grenades. It smashed into a wall, showering coins. Down the cellar, Broadman looked up and muttered to himself and carried on with his work. His entire Spindlewinter's supply of candles had already been strewn across the floor, mixed in with the stores of kindling wood. Now he was attacking a barrel of lamp oil. "Insurance," he muttered. Oil gushed out and swirled around his feet. Whittle stormed across the floor, his face a mask of rage. Rincewind took careful aim and caught the thief full in the chest with a bag of gold. Now Ymor was shouting and pointing an accusing finger. A raven swooped from its perch in the rafters and dived at the wizard, talons open and gleaming. It didn't make it. About the halfway point the luggage leapt up from its bed of splinters, gaped briefly in midair, and snapped shut. It landed lightly. Rincewind saw the lid open again slightly, just far enough for a tongue large as a palm leaf, red as mahogany, to lick up a few errant feathers. Ugh. At the same moment, a giant candle wheel fell from the ceiling, plunging the room into gloom. Rincewind, coiling himself like a spring, gave a standing jump and grasped the beam, swinging himself up to the relative safety of the roof with a strength that amazed him. "Exciting, isn't it?" said a voice by his ear. Down below, thieves, assassins, trolls, and merchants all realized at the same moment they were in a room made treacherous a foothold by gold coins and containing something among the suddenly menacing shapes in the semi-darkness that was absolutely horrible. As one, they made for the door, but had about 24 recollections of its exact position. High above the chaos, Rincewind stared at Two-Flower. "Did you cut the lights down?" he hissed. "Yes. How come you're up here?" I thought I'd better not get in everyone's way. Rincewind considered this. There didn't seem to be much he could say. Two-Flower added, a real brawl! Better than anything I'd imagined. You think I ought to thank them? Or did you arrange it? Rincewind looked at him blankly. I think we ought to be getting down now, he said hollowly. Everyone's gone. He dragged Two-Flower across the littered floor and up the steps. They burst into the tail end of the night. There were still a few stars, but the moon was down, and there was a faint gray glow rimward. Most important, the street was empty. Rincewind sniffed. Can you smell oil? Then Withel stepped out of the shadows and tripped him up. At the top of the cellar steps, Broadman knelt down and fumbled in his tinderbox. It turned out to be damp. I'll kill that bloody cat, he muttered, and groped for the spare box. It was normally on the ledge by the door. It was missing. Broadman said a bad word. He lighted a taper, and a lighted taper appeared in midair beside him. Here, take this. Thanks, said Broadman. Don't mention it. Broadman went to throw the taper down the steps. His hand paused in midair, and he looked at the taper, his brow furrowing. Then he turned around and held the taper up to illuminate the scene. It didn't shed much light, but it did give the darkness shape. Oh, no, he breathed. But yes, said Death. Rincewind rolled. For a moment he thought Withel was going to spit him where he lay, but it was worse than that. He was waiting for him to get up. I see you have a sword, wizard, he said quietly. I suggest you rise, and we shall see how well you use it. Rincewind stood up, slowly as he dared, and drew from his belt the sword he had taken from the guard a few hours and 100 years ago. It was a short, blunt affair compared to Withel's hair-thin rapier. But I don't know how to use a sword, he wailed. Good. You know that wizards can't be killed by edged weapons? Said Rincewind desperately. Withel smiled coldly. So I have heard. I look forward to putting that to the test. He lunged. Rincewind caught the thrust by sheer luck, jerked his hand away in shock, deflected the second stroke by coincidence, and took the third one through his robe at heart height. There was a clink. Withel's snarl of triumph died in his throat. He drew the sword out and prodded again at the wizard, who was rigid with terror and guilt. There was another clink, and gold coins began to drop out of the hem of his robe. So you bleed gold, do you? Hissed Withel. But have you got gold concealed in that raggedy beard, you little... The sword went back for a final sweep. The sullen glow that had been glowing in the doorway of the broken drum flickered, dimmed, and erupted into a roaring fireball that sent walls billowing outward and carried the roof 100 feet into the air before bursting through it in a gout of red-hot tiles. Withel stared at the boiling fumes unnerved, and Rincewind leapt. He ducked under the thief's sword's arm and brought his own blade around in an arc so incompetently misjudged that it hit the man flat and jolted out of the wizard's hand. Sparks and droplets of flaming oil rained down as Withel reached out with both gauntleted hands and grabbed Rincewind's neck, forcing him down. You did this, he screamed. You and your box of trickery. Thumb found Rincewind's windpipe. This is it, the wizard thought. Wherever I'm going, it can't be worse than here. Excuse me, said Two-Flower. Rincewind felt the grip lessen. Now Withel was slowly getting up, a look of absolute hatred on his face. A glowing ember landed on the wizard. He brushed it off hurriedly and scrambled to his feet. Two-Flower was behind Withel, holding the man's own needle-sharp sword with the point resting at the small of the thief's back. Rincewind's eyes narrowed. He reached into his robe and withdrew his hand, bunched into a fist. Don't move, he said. Am I doing this right? Asked Two-Flower anxiously. He says he'll skewer your liver if you move, Rincewind translated freely. I doubt it, said Withel. Bet? No. As Withel tensed himself to turn on the tourist, Rincewind lashed out and caught the thief on the jaw. Withel stared at him in amaze. for a moment, and then quietly toppled into the mud. The wizard uncurled his stinging fist, and the roll of gold coins slipped between his throbbing fingers. He looked down at the recumbent thief. "Good grief!" he gasped. He looked up and yelled as another ember landed on his neck. Flames were racing along the rooftops on either side of the street. All around him, people were hurling possessions from the windows and dragging horses from the smoking stables. Another explosion, the white-hot volcano that was the drum sent marble mantelpiece scything overhead. "The Widdershins gate's nearest," Rincewind shouted above the crackle of collapsing rafters. "Come on!" He grabbed Two Flowers' reluctant arm and dragged him down the street. "My luggage! Blast your luggage! Stay here much longer and you'll go where you don't need luggage. Come on!" screamed Rincewind. They jogged on through the crowd of frightened people, leaving the area while the wizard took great mouthfuls of cool dawn air. Something was puzzling him. "I am sure all the candles went out," he said. "So how did the drum catch fire?" "I don't know," moaned Two Flower. "It's terrible, Rincewind. We were getting along so well, too." Rincewind stopped in astonishment, so that another refugee cannoned into him and spun away with an oath. "Getting on?" "Yes, a great bunch of fellows. I thought language was a bit of a problem, but they were so keen for me to join their party. They just wouldn't take no for an answer. Really friendly people, I thought." Rincewind started to correct him, but realized he didn't know how to begin. "It'll be a blow for old Broadman." "It'll be a blow for old Broadman," Two Flower continued. "Still, he was wise. I have still got the Rinthu he paid as his first premium." Rincewind didn't know the meaning of the word premium, but his mind was working fast. "You insured the drum," he said. "You bet Broadman it wouldn't catch fire?" "Oh yes, standard valuation 200 Rinthu. Why do you ask?" Rincewind turned and stared at the flames racing towards him, and then wondered how much of Ankh-Morpork could be bought for 200 Rinthu. Quite a large piece, he decided. Only not now, not the way those flames were moving. He glanced down at the tourist. "You," he began, and searched his memory for the worst word in the Trob tongue. The happy little Betrobi didn't really know how to swear properly. "You," he repeated. Another hurrying figure bumped into him, narrowly missing him with the blade of it over its shoulder. Rincewind's tortured temper exploded. "You little such a one, while wearing a copper nose ring, stands in a footbath atop Mount Rahura during a heavy thunderstorm and shouts that a goddess of lightning has facial features of a diseased Allura root." "Just doing my job," said the figure, stalking away. Every word fell as heavily as slabs of marble. Moreover, Rincewind was certain that he was the only one who heard them. He grabbed Two Flower again. "Let's get out of here," he suggested. One interesting side effect of the fire in Ankh-Morpork concerning the insurance policy which left the city through the ravaged roof of the drum was wafted high into the Discworld's atmosphere on the ensuing thermal and came to Earth several days and a few thousand miles later on an Allura bush in the Betrobi Islands. The simple, laughing islanders subsequently worshipped it as a god, much to the amusement of the more sophisticated neighbors. Strangely enough, the rainfall and harvests for the next 2 years were also supernaturally abundant. This led to the research team being dispatched to the islands by the minor religions faculty of the Unseen University. Their verdict was that it only went to show. The fire, driven by the wind, spread out from the drum faster than a man could walk. The timbers of the Widdershins gate were already on fire when Rincewind, his face blistered and reddened from the flames, reached them. By now he and Two Flower were on horseback. The mounts hadn't been that hard to obtain. A wily merchant had asked 50 times their worth and had been left gaping when 1,000 times their worth had been pressed into his hands. They rode through just before the... Hi, dog. Sorry about that. They rode through just before the first of the big gate timbers descended in an explosion of sparks. Morpork was already a cauldron of flame. As they galloped up the red-lit road, Rincewind glanced sideways at his traveling companion, who was currently trying hard to learn to ride a horse. Bloody heck, he thought. He's alive. Me too. Who'd have thought it? Perhaps is something in this reflected sound of underground spirits. It was a cumbersome phrase. Rincewind tried to get his tongue around the thick syllables that were the word in Two Flower's own language. Ecolyrics, he tried. Ergonothics. Economics. Ergonomics. Economics. That's what it is. Economics. That would do. Economics. That would do. It sounded about right. Several hundred yards downriver from the last smoldering suburb of the city, a strangely rectangular and apparently heavily waterlogged object touched the mud of the Widdershins bank. Immediately it sprouted numerous legs and scrabbled for purchase. Hauling itself on top of the bank, the luggage, streaked with soot and stained with water and very, very angry, shook itself, took its bearings, and moved away at a brisk trot. The small, incredibly ugly imp was perched on its lid, watching the scenery with interest. Well, at least the imp got out. Bravd looked at the weasel and raised his eyebrows. "And that's it," said Rincewind. "The luggage caught up with us. Don't ask me how. Is there any more wine?" The weasel picked up an empty wineskin. "I think you've had just about enough wine this night," he said. Brav's forehead wrinkled. "Gold is gold," he said finally. "How can a man with plenty of gold consider himself poor? You're either poor or rich. It stands to reason." Rincewind hiccuped. He was finding reason rather difficult to hold on to. "Well," he said, "what I think is... the point is... well, you know octiron?" Two adventurers nodded. The strange iridescent metal was almost as highly valued in the lands around the Circle Sea as sapient pearwood. It was about as rare. A man who owned a needle made of octiron would never lose his way, since it always pointed to the hub of Discworld. Being acutely sensitive to the disc's magical field, it would also miraculously darn his socks. Well, my point is, you see, gold also has a sort of magical field, some sort of financial wizardry. Economics, Rincewind giggled. Weasel stood up, stretched. The sun was well up now, and the city below them was wreathed in mists and full of foul vapors. Also gold, he decided. Even a citizen of Morporg would, at the very point of death, desert his treasure to save his skin. Time to move. The little man called Two Flower appeared to be asleep. Weasel looked down at him and shook his head. "The city awaits, such as it is," he said. "Thank you for a pleasant tale, wizard. What will you do now?" He eyed the luggage, which immediately backed away and snapped its lid at him. "Oh, there are no ships leaving the city now," giggled Rincewind. "I suppose we'll take the coast road to Churm. Got to look after him, you see. But I didn't make it." "Sure, sure," said the weasel. He turned away and swung himself onto the saddle of the horse that Bravd was holding. A few minutes later, the two heroes were just specks under a cloud of dust heading down towards the charcoal city. Rincewind stared muzzily at the recumbent tourist, at two recumbent tourists in his somewhat defenseless state. A stray thought, wandering through the dimensions in search of a mind to harbor it, slid into his brain. "Here's another fine mess you've gotten me into," he moaned and slumped backward. "Mad," said the weasel. Bravd, galloping a few feet away, nodded. "All wizards get like that," he said. "It's the quicksilver fumes. It rots their brains. Mushrooms, too." "Moreover," said the brown-clad one. He reached into his tunic and took out a golden disc on a short chain. Bravd raised his eyebrows. "The wizard said the little man had some sort of golden disc that told him the time," said the weasel. "Arousing your cupidity, little friend. You always were an expert thief, Weasel." "Aye," agreed the weasel modestly. Touched the knob at the disc's rim. It flipped open. A very small demon imprisoned within looked up from its tiny abacus and scowled. "It lacks but 10 minutes to 8 of the clock." It snarled. The lid snapped shut, almost trapping the weasel's fingers. With an oath, the weasel hurled the time-teller far out into the heather, where it Possibly hit a stone. Something in any event caused the case to split. There was a vivid octarine flash and a whiff of brimstone as the being vanished into whatever demonic dimension it called home. "What did you do that for?" said Rob, who hadn't been close enough to hear the said words. "Do what?" said the weasel. "I didn't do nothing." "Nothing happened at all. Come on, we're wasting opportunities." Rob nodded. Together they turned their steeds and galloped towards ancient Ankh and honest enchantments. And that's the end of that chapter. The next chapter is called The Sending of Eight, and the prologue for that will have to come next time. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the second half of the first chapter, The Color of Magic. And I'll see you guys next time for Sending of Eight, which is in the book titled The Color of Magic. I think these were originally short stories that he pasted together. They all follow Rincewind and Two Flower and their prolonged adventures. So, well, hopefully you guys will enjoy them. For now, you guys take care.